Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the the sort of assignment I want you to do. Okay, there is only one thing that you absolutely must know about this. Okay, and I want you to consider that idea of nature versus nurture. Okay, and all I want you to do is sit in front of a couple of blank sheets of paper for an hour and start to diagram out what you think it is. Okay, and this is going directly into diagramming without any formal training about diagramming. Okay, and there's a good reason for this. Okay, um, basically, in the absence of any kind of convention about what a diagram should be, you're all free to interpret, generally speaking, how you want to communicate the idea. Okay, and you'll find that a lot of different architectural tectonics and stuff can come out of that sort of unstructured discussion. So I'm going to show you a few examples of essential diagrams for basic abstract ideas and allow you to kind of take that and run with it. Okay. Um, basically, yeah, and I'll preface this by saying I don't know the backstory of each of these projects, but what I can speak to is the applicability of this type of analysis as it applies to our assignment. So this right here, what the reason I'm showing you this particular image is because simple geometries, whether or not they're quadrilaterals or just straight polygons, or if you're going to do trapezoidal forms, however you want to regulate that, the key is algorithmic. Okay. Um, the thing that I want you to focus on in this is that you set up a series of rules. Those rules can be bent and in some cases broken, but basically what you're seeing here is an analysis of simple polygons. Generally speaking, they all have the same number of sides. I think in only one or two cases it has a different number of sides. And that's what I'm seeing on the left. But then when you jump over to the right, it's sort of a derivation of that, where it turns it into a line drawing, and that line drawing kind of breaks all the angular rules that are associated with the diagram on the left. Okay, I'm interpreting it that way, but that's just me looking at it. But what I'm getting at is that I want you to think about that idea of nature and nurture, right? So think about diagrammatic elements as, is nature a solid block or is nature an empty block? And if it's one or the other, how do I modify that block in order to communicate a different idea about each? What happens if I have two blocks or two polygons and I overlay them partially on top of one another, or if I overlay them entirely on top of one another? So ask yourself a series of questions that in many cases can be seriously seemingly irrelevant, but you'll find that just by sitting there for an hour and forcing yourself to nonstop sketch about the idea, you'll see that even kind of within the depths of your own mind, there are these weird ideas about how diagramming can be communicated that will come out. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to force you to start communicating graphically. Okay. So I will reiterate, absolutely 1 hour I want you to sit down, no distractions, and I want you to sketch out diagrammatic ideas. Okay. Moving on. The next example that I want to show you here is, it's moving more in a little bit of a pictorial sort of perspective. Okay, so what you're seeing here is sort of, exploring geometry as basically a composition. So, you've got blocks, lines, arcs, and then you have perspective, and you have context, right? So feel free to explore the idea of perspective via your sketching as well, if that helps you to, work through a part of an idea, okay? But I don't want you to get too pictorial too fast. So try just doing points, lines, and planes and see what you can communicate via a diagram. Are there any questions on that so far? None. Okay. Basically, yeah. Okay. So this image here is getting a little bit more pictorial, and it's starting to look at something as an actual architectural condition. I'm not saying that I necessarily want you to get to that level, but what I am showing you here is the idea of a geometric overlay. Okay, so this has an algorithmic system built into it that you can emulate, but I would do it diagrammatically. So let me just grab a snip real fast. So feel free to take a pre-existing image. Oh my gosh, they're getting crazy over there. Feel free to take a pre-existing image and diagram that as well. You know, it's a good place to start to kind of try to understand how other people have developed geometric relationships. And so what I'm seeing here, the algorithm is very similar to the diagram that we saw in number 1, where these polygons are actually being used as systems in different ways. So you've got your contextual systems that are essentially just have a variable in what angle they're actually bending. You have your actual objective system that is exactly the same thing, but the only variable here is this. It's the angle of the turn. Similar, you have the opposite circulation system. Similar variable. Everything else is generally the same. And all of your context is built off of the same kind of construct. It's just turning different ways. Okay, and then you, of course, you're going to have your deviations, right? So you have your sort of box elements that are kind of bounding this in a number of conditions, right? So anyway, short story long, what I want you to focus on really are those key elements. I want you to kind of look at an image potentially, and it's your choice to decide whether or not this is what you want to do, but try to extrapolate what the system actually is. And then do that a couple of times, but then move into your sketching and try to do something for your own. Remember, it's about nurture versus nature. So what kinds of geometry can communicate nurture, and what kinds of geometry can communicate nature, okay? And there are a couple of very simple responses, and I want to point you back to, a little bit back to this one. I think this is a key image for you, so I would kind of just stare at this one for maybe 5 minutes and think nurture, nature, nurture, nature, and see what thoughts pop into your mind. Moving on. Because this is such an open-ended exploratory assignment, feel free to get kind of, you know, design class-ish in here for a moment. And just grab all of the scraps from your old projects, which I'm sure you have plenty laying around, and just start hacking away at it and putting together an amalgamation of both materials and, you know, whether it's volumetric or linear or planar, you know, different types of forms, and start doing your overlay system that way, but focus on the algorithm. Okay, so you have basically an algorithmic rule is that I have 2 materials, right? Where do my 2 materials meet? Do they only meet in the horizontal plane and then everything stacks in terms of assembly, or do they only meet in sort of a butt-end condition and then everything kind of grows 3-dimensionally, right? So those are the algorithmic rules that I want you to think about and think about how it can communicate back to the idea of nurture and nature, okay? Questions yet? No, not exactly. So I got 2 questions, one of which was, so we're just sketching. The other one was, so you want us to build a model, right? And they're 2 very different things. I want you to do whatever feels right, okay? Because the important thing here is that you get a good, solid understanding of how you can analyze such an abstract idea, nurture and nature. What's the relationship between the 2? Okay, so I'm showing you a slate of different ways of analyzing things. I don't know what this one is, but I'm just showing you this as an example of, like, you know, maybe your way of nurture and nature. The blocks are, you know, the very, you know, nurturing man-made environment, but the natural part of it are these sort of stick elements, right? You know, since so much of the natural world is fibrous, in essence, you can use that to sort of tie in a natural way all these very nurturing environments back together. Does that make sense? Yeah. So then you would kind of set up like an algorithm system that defines when and where you tie them together. Is that helpful? Yeah. So if you've got a lot of scrap, go for it. I'm just giving you this as an idea. Otherwise, sketching is totally fine. All right, moving on. So in your sketching, You can get pictorial, but I want you to try to stay away from pictorial representations as much as possible. If you're going to get pictorial, don't get hung up on drawing things in proper axonometric or isometric unless you have a very good reason for doing so. What I think would be a little bit better is if you start to look at things just freehand. And you can build in some perspective projections into that, but this is an interesting pictorial look at what it means to sort of blend and bend space either from the natural environment. That's kind of what I'm seeing up here, is that it's sort of growing away from the natural environment, and it's actually sort of extruding and bending into something that is incubating to the human condition, if that makes any sense. And then it kind of stretches and sort of reaches back down into the natural environment a little bit. Okay, so if you want to explore it pictorially, that's fine, but I do want you to pair it up with a narrative about basically what your rules are and why you drew what you drew. Okay, because pictorial is a little bit harder to communicate the actual algorithmic justification for what you do. So I would like a narrative kind of built in with that. And then of course, this is what I really don't want you to do, is get into Rhino and start building blocks and then cutting it out from the side of a hill. Okay? You guys all look so lost. And, honestly, it's to be expected. This is going to feel really weird, especially because right now, like, this is a software course. So why am I doing sketching? Why am I doing models, right? I want to be sure that you believe in the mission that I'm trying to introduce here. So we can have a long, good conversation about it. But the essence is that I personally believe that the hardest thing for an architecture student to do, or a designer in general to do, is to think abstractly in a technical space, and that technical space being Rhino, right? Or any modeling software. But you guys are constantly being, thrown, like, what was the command that he used? Do I use blend surface or loft or sweep 2 or network surface? What do I use, right? Like, you're constantly just thinking technical all the time. The real challenge is whether or not you can think creatively and abstractly at the same time that you're thinking technically. So that's why I need you to be doing this assignment. You need to think abstractly about what is the relationship of nature and nurture at the same time that you're trying to develop an algorithmic rule set to address it. So I need those two. So sketch, and then I want you to actually be able to put into words, or if you want to write it down on the side of whatever you do, that's helpful too, what your rules are that you developed. So if you have, I'm going to jump back to sort of my first one right here, this one right here, right? So if you think nature is obtuse and welcoming, and it's kind of expansive, right? A geometry like perhaps this one right here, and that one right there might actually lend itself very well to that idea. That's an abstract idea about basically just an analytical geometry. Similarly, if you're thinking about the idea of nurture, it might be a more acute or enclosed sort of environment, right? So these ones that you kind of see in the middle here, they're all very nurturing forms, okay? So when you take the two and you start pairing them up, what do you get, right? So that's where your algorithm comes in. You have A, you have B, right? Your A polygon, your B polygon. When and where do those two integrate? Do they integrate in the vertical environment where one is on top of the other? Typically, you're going to have nature below typically you're going to have nature below nurture, and they're going to be separate. But when you blend the two, how do you blend them? Do you blend the interior or exterior, right? So those are the rule sets that I'm trying to get you to start to establish. And it doesn't have to be a complete thought. Okay, this is a brainstorm. Did I explain it thoroughly enough for you to sit down for an hour and sketch and write some notes? You guys all look really scared of this one.
It's very different.
It is very different, yes. The course is going to start to feel very different going forward. Okay. So I'm going to stop this video because I feel like you guys are all like shell-shocked. But I imagine you're going to have questions. Let's spend the rest of this class closing the book on all assignments you haven't turned in. And make sure, I'm going to put the drop folder up here for your midterm. Make sure that you give me that before you leave today. Or do I already have that folder? I'm not sure. Okay. Where's my mouse? There it is.